beautiful hymn. I don't think we've sung that one before, at least I haven't, so thank you. Would you please pray with me? Oh God, we, your people, are waiting, with hands and hearts open to receive instruction and encouragement, perhaps even a word of challenge too, that will help us to be your faithful disciples. I pray, oh God, that my words would be faithful to you, and that all our hearts would be open to the movement of your Spirit in this hour of worship. In your name we pray. A few months ago, I was out shopping at Costco, and I ran into a fellow Dumbartonian. And we were catching up in the parking lot. I was buying supplies for our pop-up breakfast, and she was pricing new tires. And in the midst of our conversation, she paused and she said, "You know, I've been meaning to reach out to you about your sermons." And I wasn't sure exactly where this was headed. So I decided there was no time like the present to let her get whatever it was off of her chest. And so I invited her to go ahead and share there in the Costco parking lot. And she said that recently I had preached about how we were supposed to love everyone. That this is something that God calls us to do, that Jesus commands us to do. And this wasn't the first time I had said this from the pulpit, and she admitted that it was just really hard for her to hear, let alone to do. Sure, there were lots of people that she did love and worked hard at loving, even when those relationships weren't perfect. But she said that loving everyone, well, that just might be a bridge too far. I keep thinking of the former president, she said, or the police officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck. I'm just not sure I can love them. Now, I'm not sharing this person's name. I'm not calling her out because I don't want anyone, including her, to think that I'm picking on her. Because I think, in fact, this person gives voice to something that many of us struggle with. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands this morning, but how many of you have trouble loving someone that you don't like? This person doesn't have to be someone that we know personally, although sometimes it is. Maybe it's a neighbor or a coworker or a family member. Could be someone here at church. Or it could be someone who cuts you off in traffic. Someone that you're just vaguely connected with on social media. Or someone whose words and actions you are viewing from afar. But we all have people that we don't like. It's just part of being human. And some of these people we do have to deal with every day or every week. Some of them live rent-free in our heads. And our dislike for them and our frustration, our disgust, makes them very hard for us to love. But because we live in the world, we live in this world, which is increasingly polarized and divided, where we are quick to judge and categorize people as either like us or not like us, and where we try to navigate an increasingly complex society in which we are often tempted to reduce our fellow humans to limiting categories based on their political affiliation, or their race, or class, or gender, or profession, or some other label that will help us to discern whether they are part of our tribe or one of them. We need a reminder that we are all, at the end of the day, part of the same human family. And that as Christians, we are called to try and love every one of these, our brothers, sisters, siblings. So these next few weeks, I'm going to be talking about how we love people that we don't like. And we're going to talk about things like what it means to speak the truth in love, or how to forgive, or set boundaries. But today I wanted us to ground ourselves in the spiritual foundation that helps us remember why it is we are supposed to try and love everyone, including people we don't like. And one of those is the core belief, not just of Christianity, but of all the Abrahamic faiths, this idea that each and every one of us, and all of us together, are created in the image of God. And there it is, right there at the beginning of our sacred text, this story from Genesis, where God created all that is, but it was humanity that God made specifically in God's own image. Male and female, God created them, the Bible says, and I don't think that this binary is meant to exclude or be limiting to only two genders, but to acknowledge the diversity and the equality of all humans in all ways, including gender. You see, in this creation story, God is purposeful, intentional, making humankind in God's own image and likeness. Early Christian scholars called this the imago Dei in Latin, the image and likeness of God. It was and is the foundational understanding of this unique relationship that humans have with the divine. And throughout history, Christians as well as Jews have had differing views on the ways in which we are and are not like God, the ways in which the imago Dei is manifested. Some argued that the image of God in humans is found in the shared characteristics between God and humanity, such as rationality, morality, our ability to reason, to make good and bad choices. This is part of humanity that is most like the divine, some would argue. But another perspective would say that the image of God is found in human relationships. And the relationship that we have with God and with each other that is set apart from creation, that is grounded in human community and human love, a reflection of God, the three in one, the imago Dei. Still another view interprets the image of God as a role or function whereby humans act on God's behalf, serve as God's stewards in the created order, giving us a unique responsibility to care for creation, or some might say, subdue it. And these historical views are not necessarily exclusive to each other. They all have compelling and troubling aspects to them. But this doctrine of the imago Dei has provided an important theological grounding for the development of human rights and the dignity of each life. And the truth is that in all of these different interpretations, the creation of humanity by God is not accidental. Humanity was created on purpose, in the image of God with intention, unique and individual and complex. And this imago Dei should shape how we treat each other as well. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. The first way in which we understand the imago Dei in our human relationships is that each person is of sacred worth. That the value of a human life is not simply connected to what they say or do, the role that they play in society, what they produce, but simply because of the one who created them. A couple of weeks ago, we stood in a circle and we reaffirmed and remembered our baptism. We recalled the words that God spoke over Jesus when the heavens opened up and said, "You are my beloved child." And likewise, each and every one of us is claimed and called beloved. It doesn't matter if you are the Vice President of the United States or an undocumented immigrant dropped off at her front doorstep. Both the lawyer in the $1 million Georgetown house and the unhoused neighbor are beloved. Each and every person, each and every human life. This is at the heart of ethics and human dignity, that every person deserves at least this much respect. To know that they are made in the image and likeness of God, even the people we don't like. A friend of mine reminded me that back when we were in seminary at Emory University, the medical school would invite theology students at the beginning of each school year to come to the gross anatomy class. Before the medical students started to take apart these cadavers that had been donated for their learning, the theology students would be invited to pray over these bodies. I didn't have this experience, but my friend Matt did, and he said it was a holy, although a little strange, experience. Because they stood over these dead human bodies and they prayed. They gave thanks for these people's life, for their gift to learning, and for who they were and what they did in their life. They didn't know anything about them, but they acknowledged in that moment, before the medical students took their scalpels, that these were sacred human lives. That even in their death, they had value. You see, there is a danger of not recognizing one another's humanity. When we start to see human lives as expendable, not valuable, not worthy of protection or love or the same rights as you and me. In the most extreme examples, this leads to things like terrorism, genocide, systemic racism. It's this type of thinking that leads to the horrific shooting that we saw last night in California, taking place in an Asian American community on the weekend when they were celebrating the Lunar New Year. And our dehumanizing doesn't always go to these extremes, these violent extremes, but we too, in our daily interactions, sometimes dehumanize one another. We allow our ranking of human life to justify our prejudices, our disrespect, because of how we diminish another person's humanity and their value as a child of God. The other way in which we have to remember the Imago Dei is in the individual complexity of each and every human. The psalmist writes, "I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made," which is a powerful acknowledgement of the uniqueness of each and every human being. Every one of us has different gifts and flaws and passions and preferences and abilities and shortcomings. Each one of us is nuanced and complex. We cannot be reduced simply to stereotypes. And yet, we often do that, don't we? As a shorthand of trying to label someone, discern who they are. We distill down all these nuances and complexities and we just put a label on them. I recently discovered this guy on Instagram, TJ Theory, and he's a comedian. And he makes these videos about oldest, middle, and youngest children. He himself is a middle child, but in the videos he picks up each role and he plays them perfectly. As the parent of 3 kids and as an oldest child, I am a big believer in birth order and how it shapes and forms us. So some of these things are true. In one video, he demonstrates how kids come home with their backpacks, and the oldest child comes and pulls out a folder and a perfectly neat piece of paper with no creases, and it has an A+ and says, "Mom, would you like to see what I brought home from school?" The middle child comes in, unzips the backpack, dumps everything out, and then takes off their shoe and pours a pile of sand on the kitchen counter. Middle child, the youngest child, walks in with no backpack at all. And the mother says, "Where is your backpack?" He said, "Oh, I left it outside. You're going to get it for me, right?" Oldest, middle, youngest, some of us are only children. And that might be part of who we are, but it's by no means all of who we are. And there are lots of reasons, because of the diversity of families and the complexities of family systems, that sometimes these birth order tropes and stereotypes just don't ring true. And yet we do this because we're trying to have a shortcut in this complex world, to kind of label people and assume that we know something about them based on where they come from, or what they look like, or the bumper stickers on their car, or what they share on social media. But the prophet Ted Lasso reminds us that we are to be curious and not judgmental. Curious, not judgmental, about the differences in each of us, the complexities, the nuances that make each and every one of us a reflection of the divine. And here is where I think it becomes really challenging. This can be the hardest part for us to remember, that a person's differences from me and you is also a reflection of God. The way in which someone is different from me is also an image, just a part of who God is. There is a reflection, an image, a light of God in each and every one of us, and when that butts up against the differences in the reflection and the light in me, we actually burn brighter. We shine brighter because we each see a different image of God, of the same God. There's this practice in monastic communities where, as worship begins, the monks will file into the sacred space and they will bow before the altar. And then they will turn and they will bow toward one another. It is an acknowledgement in the beginning of the worship that God is here and out there and in this sacred space, but God is also in each and every one of us. And that living together in community means acknowledging that God is not only in me, God is also in you. And we have to practice seeing that image of God in each other, no matter how tarnished or shattered that image may be. People we dislike may actually have something to teach us. Some of you may be familiar with the Enneagram. It's a spiritual tool that says there's 9 basic spiritual types of all kinds of people. Again, this is a labeling of sorts, but the idea is that we all have basic drives and fears that make us unique, and that when someone challenges us or seems different from us, it seems to be motivated out of some different kind of drive or bringing a different kind of perspective, that is actually enriching our life together. It may be hard to see the image of God, but maybe if we see that their unique gifts, their different perspective, their personality quirks are actually a different reflection of God than the one that is in me, and that enriches me, and we enrich each other, that can be a powerful practice. And it also makes us aware that if we dismiss that person, that person because they are different, or because they frustrate us, or they irritate us, we are missing out on part of God. I know this probably seems really elementary to some of you. This idea of the Imago Dei, it's pretty basic in our Christian theology. But I think it's so important for us to not only try to remember, but to keep in our minds and our consciousness as we go out into the world, to put into practice as we live together in community. And in the weeks to come, when we talk about difficult things like speaking the truth in love, or setting boundaries, or learning how to forgive other people, the idea that another person is also made in the image of God, just like you and me, is so fundamental. So I invite you as you go forth this week to try and just remember the Imago Dei in yourself and in every person that you meet. To let this idea of the image of God in each person be an invitation to be curious rather than judgmental when we encounter someone who is difficult or challenging. May we remember that that person too is made in the image and likeness of God. May it give us an opportunity to reflect before we react. And may we learn to love ourselves and our neighbors. Thanks be to God.
It is a new year. Many of us have made pledges to this church to help support the ministries of the church. Whether you've pledged or whether you haven't, but still want to support the church, this would be a good time to provide a donation to the ministries of this church. If you're here in the sanctuary, you can certainly put a gift, a check in the boxes by